Hi, Sandra here. Welcome back to my channel. Lord of the Fading Lands by C.L. Wilson is a book I am very excited to share with you today. First, I want to thank Avon over at HarperCollins for sending me a copy of the book. I got the book maybe a month and a half ago, and I've been waiting to read it for March because they are redoing all of the covers on these books, and the second book is going to be re-released this month. Lord of the Fading Lands is book one in the Tairen Soul series. It's a 5-book series, and this is adult high fantasy or high romantasy, and this was actually published back in 2007, so 17 years ago. Because it's an older book, it does have a little bit of that more classic fantasy, high fantasy feel to it when you're reading it. Just the descriptions and the world building is that much richer. This did come out also 17 years after Robert Jordan's Eye of the World, so it definitely has some of that influence with it, as well as like Janny Wurts with her writing. It isn't that old. And then, in later years closer to this book, like Jacqueline Carey. Jacqueline and C.L. Wilson both have like really rich writing and character depictions and very nuanced worlds. So I'm excited to talk about this one with you. I'm just going to go ahead and get any potential negatives out of the way on this, but because this book was written almost 17 years ago, the writing can seem a little bit slower paced just because there is so much description, whether it's about food being eaten or a setting or the attire that the characters are wearing. Even in this book, it is high fantasy, so the author has created like a fae language, and so throughout the book, you're going to get sprinkled in with fae phrases and different terms and stuff. And so there is like a glossary at the back of the book that you can look up what some phrases and words mean, but there isn't like a pronunciation guide. So for that, I would recommend listening to the audiobook as well for that full immersion. I did borrow the audiobook from my library. I was kind of listening in on some parts, but primarily I did read this just the physical book. And you can tell that the audiobook is older too. Like there's some hum noise kind of in the background, but the voice actress herself did a really phenomenal job with how she depicted all different characters, male and female. So she did a great job. It's just an old audio recording. I will say, if you consider yourself a huge, high fantasy or romantasy fan, C.L. Wilson is going to be on your must-read list. Since this is my first C.L. Wilson read ever, I plan on correcting that and going through and reading this series, as well as her other books that came out previously, because I was blown away by the characters in this story, and marketing-wise, C.L. Wilson is pitched as like an OG queen of fantasy, and I totally see that when I'm reading this book. There were countless times when I read this cover to cover that Throne of Glass or ACOTAR or even Jennifer Armentrout and even Holly Black, how she depicts her fae in her world, it reminded me of this book. It's really interesting to discover tropes in older books like this because you can see how much influence authors like Sarah J Maas pulled from works like this. And if I'm not mistaken, SJM did mark this book as read on her Goodreads. So I know she's read this book. There's no way that this book did not influence her other series. Even the main MC of this book, Rainier, he is a dark-haired, brooding, ancient fae with lavender, like purple amethyst eyes, which is basically like a Rhysand, right? And he also can transform or shapeshift into like this, they're called Tairen. So the series is called Tairen Soul. So there are the fae creatures, and they can channel elemental power, but only the fae king has true mastery over all 5 types of power, which are air, earth, fire, water, and then there's one called Spirit, Captain Planet. Hey, there's also a 6th power, but that one is a forbidden magic and it's used by these dark mages essentially. But even with just the description of the main character in this, there were so many other tiny little details that were definitely, pulled and influenced other, more modern day romantasy authors. The whole concept of true mates versus heart mates, mates that you choose of your own volition versus ones by fate you are tied to. So just the difference between that book goes heavy into delineating between the 2 different kinds of mates, as well as just a ton of court intrigue and a lot of political games. This book has a lot of it, and I was definitely swept up into it. What this book reminded me of, if you're familiar with the Wheel of Time series and you've read those books, this book opens up with a prologue, and the prologue reminds me of the Eye of the World prologue, where the previous dragon, Tairen, has lost his mind and massacred everyone in his family, everyone he loves, and he breaks the world. This book opens on the Fae King Rhysand. He is desperate to bring the Fae back to their former power and glory. Almost 1200 years before, he scorched the entire world, killing millions of people after he was struck with a madness from his chosen mate at the time being killed. It kind of has that same epic start to the book. As you're reading the book, it does jump POV to POV. Not a lot, not like House of Flame and Shadows that just came out. It's not that bad, but it does jump from POV to POV. So kind of like in the Wheel of Time series, you do get the POV of these mysterious unknown characters that you're in their head, and it's a quick cutscene that shows you some of the nefarious things that they're doing, just people that they're spying on, evil schemes that are in the works. That kind of gives this level of suspense and paranoia as you're reading the story. There's just a lot of mystery about it. And then the main character, her name is Elisetta, Ellie, and she is a very like classical trope in older books, not just fantasy. She is the I'm ugly and plain looking, I can't do anything for myself kind of female main character. And every other character tells her how plain and unfortunate looking that she is. She has an overbearing mother, which this is a common thing in like Regency era romances and historical fiction and that type of thing. There's always like the overbearing mother who is very much invested in marrying her daughters off and that kind of thing. It has like a lot of that too. So if you like those kinds of stories, you'll probably like this as well. But even just the title of this, like Lord of the Fading Lands, and I think the second book is called Queen of Light and Shadow, and then the third book is like King of Sky and Sword. Like even just that naming convention of the titles is very reminiscent of current day fantasy books, specifically romantasy books. With all of that said, there is a huge age gap between the male and the female love interest in this. So the male is 1200 years old, the female is 24 years old. I'm not here to give a dissertation on the literary value of specific stories and their tropes, so I'm just here to experience and enjoy the stories themselves. I don't care about that. I just want to put it out there. There is a big age gap and then like a plain Jane MC. And then because someone is going to ask, or someone out there is wondering, yes, there are some like sexual scenes in it. It still has kind of tamped down language, like calling things a heat or a sex or core. Like it doesn't use explicit language. But the romance, or I should say the sex scenes, because there are sex scenes between not the main characters in this that are pretty explicit. This is adult, high fantasy, high romantasy, and it is a slow burn. So this book is like 400 pages. You get like small teases of things, but it isn't until like 300 pages in or something that you start getting more of that. So it is a slow burn. But essentially the premise of this book is Elisetta was adopted as, you know, a 1-year-old baby when she was found in the woods abandoned. She doesn't really know who her parents are. All she knows is she is this green-eyed redhead who has nightmares, and in these nightmares someone is trying to find her, and it seems to be this very shadow-like kind of man, and she has some secrets that she's hiding throughout the book that you don't really know until the end. And so there's a lot of revealing of what her secrets are and a lot of this relationship development between her and the Fae King Rhysand. And so the beginning of this book begins with her getting assaulted, and then because of that being betrothed to the son of the butcher. Again, these are tools that SJM used in her books, but there is like this mating bond and mind speaking, and so she gets connected with Rhysand from that. And so there are a lot of scenes where they are speaking mind to mind, where they can feel each other's emotions. They can speak to each other's mind, but they can't read each other's mind, but they can get a pretty good idea of like what's going on emotionally with the other person. And so it's a lot of just the relationship slowly unfurling between Rhysand and Ellie, and then a lot of court games, because in this world there are the Fading Lands, which is where the Fae live, and then there is the human world, which is ruled by King Dorian and his son Prince Dorian, the crown prince, and then Queen Honora. And Queen Honora is like a Morghese kind of character, the Queen of Andor from Wheel of Time. Very much reminded me of that. And then you have the Eld, who are kind of the mages, and they are not good people, and they use a lot of the dark magic. And so you have different factions factions of people, and it felt very much like trying to figure out who's working for the shadow side and who is trying to manipulate the main character and the people surrounding her. So this was such a good book. It took me maybe 4 days to read this, and I'm kicking myself for never having heard who this author is because she is wonderful. There are tens of thousands of people who have read her books according to Goodreads, or at least rated and reviewed the book, but it's getting really decent ratings, and I am so glad that the publisher sent me this book because she is one that I'm going to read the next 4 books, and I will read The Winter King and The Sea King as well. So I'm really excited about her. C.L. Wilson has really fantastic characterization. There's like this little part that I kind of want to read about Ellie's betrothed. Den Brodson, the butcher's son, was a stuffed pork roast of a young man, and ever since his first wife had died in childbirth 6 months ago, he'd been following Ellie around like a starving hound on the trail of a juicy steak. He'd made a habit of catching her in dark corners, standing so close she could smell the reek of onions and bacon on him, and looking too intently down the neckline of her dresses, as if he could see straight through the fabric to the soft curves beneath. His thick fingers were ever clutching at her arm as if he had some right to her. She shuddered with revulsion. She'd never liked him much, even as a child. Now he made her skin crawl. I mean, so that was just one depiction of a kind of a bad character in this book, but there are so many lines in here that are like achingly romantic, that really slow burn romance, which I enjoyed. And then there are lines in here that are so funny. I don't want to be too spoilery. There's like this drink that's kind of like a spice coffee, which is an aphrodisiac, and there are some scenes in this where people at court are drinking this, and so people are becoming aroused, and then the emotions are kind of magnifying, and there's just a lot of kind of humorous parts and dialogue that comes from that. So I can't speak enough about how good this book is. My problem with a lot of romantasy today is that you read the book in like one sitting, it almost feels really light and you're done with it, but this, just because how it's written and how much depth is put into these scenes, like how structured they are, you almost take your time reading it more, and you get to like live and experience these scenes more deeply. I gave this book 4.5 stars, and I only subtracted half a star because, you know, this book was written 17 years ago, and so there were some gender nitpicks that I had that were just a tiny bit grating, but like nothing deal breaker. This was such a wonderful read to me. Cannot recommend this one enough. Go pick up Lord of the Fading Lands by C.L. Wilson, and then go and get the next book. I tried looking for the old covers because there's something glorious about the art for the Tairen creatures that are on the old covers, but you can't find any of the old covers anymore. I'm kind of sad that you can't because I feel like those are going to be like little treasure finds, but these are good too. So I like this one. As you can see, I tabbed a lot of things. And even just like, there's this line that the main character says to Ellie. This is just a taste of like the Fae language that the author created. Ver reisa kuchai kem sura shaitani. Your soul calls out, mine answers, beloved. It's just so romantic. But anyway, that's all I've got for you today. Lord of the Fading Lands. Go pick it up. If you're a fantasy fan or a romantasy fan, if you read this one, please let me know what you think. And I will see you next time.